Dave Straley, and we are here today in the 49er Athletic Hall of Fame with two members of the Athletic Hall of Fame, two-star rowers from Long Beach. The purpose of these videos is to document and get a history of beach crew from back at the start of college, and get everything from in the stories on the camaraderie to the dedication to the accomplishments. And one of the accomplishments, both of these, Joan and John Van Blom, were single scullers for the United States. Both represented the United States in the Olympics, 68 for John and 76 for Joan, which for those of you who don't row, that's your rowing, and as John said earlier, rowing by yourself. There's no 8-4 or whatever, it's you. You represent the United States, and it's you against the rest of the world. One of the accomplishments, they have lots of medals and lots of international accomplishments, but one thing that stands out in my mind, an accomplishment that will go down in history, is that John did a headstand in a Pocock 8 in 1969, I believe, spring of 1969. Now, I want to know the technique, all right? Was it on the seat? And for those of you who don't know, Pocock 8s back then were made out of redwood cedar, very thin wood. And it was very easy to put a foot or something through one, and they were obviously very easy to tip. So I want to know the motivation. Was there a bet? Was Joan standing on the beach? You were trying to impress her?
Joan.
Was there a bet? Was there a...
I don't think there was a bet, and unfortunately I can't remember all the details, but it was just something to do.
Was Lockyer, in the chase boat, or was he off with the freshman?
He was probably off somewhere.
All right. Well, that's that. No one is in Long Beach beach crew history has done a headstand in a Pocock 8, and I don't think anyone ever will again. So.
It was early, first year that I started rowing, and it was after practice, and there was, I don't remember who exactly, but maybe some parents and probably 4 or 5 people standing around talking with Bill Lockyer afterwards, and Bill was explaining how rowing is really a team sport, and there's no stars in rowing except maybe if you're a single sculler, then people don't know your name unless you're rowing a single, and I thought, I want to row a single.
And that was in high school?
That was high school. Yeah.
Wow. So then you went and got a single?
Well, I was encouraged to row singles too when my coach, had me row. In fact, I went back to the high school national championships in my first year rowing and racing the junior singles. And he encouraged me to do that. But I was motivated to do it as well as being encouraged to do it, self-motivated.
So when did you start?
I started the fall of 1962.
As a
sophomore in high school.
High school.
Yeah, I was 14.
And what high school was it?
It was Wilson.
Wilson, and they had a rowing team?
No, but there was a man in the club that wanted to coach high school age kids, and so he recruited from Wilson.
It's closest high school.
Yeah,
right.
So they just announced it, over the PA system in the morning when they make announcements that they were, looking for people to row. And coincidentally, a couple weeks earlier, we were living on our boat in the Long Beach Marina at the time, and the guy that turned out to be our coach was rowing around looking for a friend of his that had a boat there, and my dad was there and got in a conversation with him, and the guy told him they were looking for kids, long, tall, lanky kids to row. And my dad mentioned that to me, and then I heard the announcement at Wilson, so the two of them were enough to get me down to the boathouse and think about it and give it a try.
So your family, your dad, you were living on a boat.
Yeah.
And your dad, you told me before, was from Holland.
Originally, yeah.
Originally from
He's
Holland.
lived there. He's been here since he was 18.
Did he come over before the war or after the war?
Both. He was here when he was real young, and he was elementary school age.
Okay.
And then they went back to Holland, and then when the war was starting to get going, my grandfather realized that he needed to get my dad out of there, or he was going to be, the Nazis were
Right.
going to going to draft him. And so they came over when he was 18, and came through Canada and down.
Before occupation? Before
Yeah.
the Nazis took over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, did your dad and your family have, or did your dad have a rowing or a water background?
He had a water background. He swam and competitively, his high school age. And then when he got over here, he was surfing, in the late 30s.
Oh, wow.
As kind of one of the pioneers of surfing, when
Absolutely.
there's probably 100 people on the whole coast that,
Right.
were surfing, And so he did surfing and boating. We always had, when I was growing up, we always had a sailboat. We went, we kept it in San Pedro for quite a while, and every weekend we'd go down and do work on the boat, and then eventually when I was in high school, my dad built 4 boats, and then when I was junior high, he built this sailboat, 40-foot sailboat, and finished it in high school, and we moved it to Long Beach Marina, and we lived aboard for 2.5 years.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And then when we had it at the Long Beach Marina, I was going to Wilson, and so we had it over at Basin 1, over by what's near the restaurants over there.
Right.
And we had a friend that lived on Apping Way by the yacht club, and that was going to Wilson. Somebody that was my age, and so I rowed the dinghy across the bay there and pulled the dinghy up by the Long Beach Yacht Club, and then walked up to these people's houses and got a ride to school. And then after school, it'd drive me back, and I'd get in the dinghy and row across. And then while I was doing that, some kids that I ended up rowing with eventually rowed by, joked, "Hey, you want to race?"
So your rowing started with the dinghy?
Yeah, I've been rowing
Dinghies.
dinghies since I was, about the same time I could walk. I was rowing dinghies.
And when you rowed dinghies, did you feather?
Did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you actually had technique, right?
Yeah, and I
right
think
from
there
the-
was some carryover. It did, it did give me a feel for the boat. I mean, there's things that are a lot different if you're rowing a dinghy and rowing a shell, but I think there was some crossover, some awareness, and that helped out when I started rowing.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, Joan, before we do the introduction, Joan, when did you first step into a shell?
In 1970, fall of 1970, so when I was a freshman at Cal State Long Beach.
So you didn't row, you went to Wilson High School also,
I went to
correct?
Wilson High School. I was born in Long Beach, grew up in Long Beach, and I was not aware of the rowing center until I was in college.
Okay. So you get to college and...
I get to college, so my high school boyfriend from Wilson at the time, he started the rowing with the freshman crew, and I went down to watch him. I also had someone in a class that I sat next to, and he was rowing crew, and I saw him down there, and he was really the connection. There were just 2 females, period, that were rowing regularly down there. There was Cal State Long Beach Shell and Oar that came down on the weekends, but the women that were actually regularly going out in boats, there were 2 women. And this classmate introduced me to Melinda Collis at the time, and she said, "I heard you want to try rowing," and she put me in a boat. So there were kind of 2 ways that I got started. That way, she put me in a wherry.
Wherry, okay.
And I also went out, and I don't remember exactly which came first, with Shell and Oar in the barge. With the big 16 passengers, you could walk between the
Right.
2. So those were close together, whatever happened first. If I went probably in the barge first, and then I found out that you could actually become a member of the rowing club and row by yourself. So that's what really got me hooked.
And the wherry was a
wherry was a
fiberglass-
wider fiberglass
Well,
boat that
then
was
the
more
wherries
stable.
they were wood.
Oh, were they wood?
Yeah. No,
When you started, maybe they were
feels like a
fiberglass
fiberglass.
ones.
And I also went out in a double with her. She was very skilled. Melinda had been rowing, I think, the previous year. They'd even gone to the national championships with her partner, Karen McCloskey at the time. Now it's Keene. And Karen is who I ended up being a doubles partner with my first year of rowing, and that was primarily in doubles. And what really hooked me in and kept me there was Tom McKibben, who that was in 1970, so he was already a well-established, successful sculler at the time. 68, he'd been a spare on the 68 Olympic team. 69, he'd won the World or European Championships with Joan in the double. And 70, he wanted to start coaching women. And so I just feel I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, to have someone with a desire to coach, and I was the right age, and I'd always wished, even at my end of my high school years, that I'd gotten in some competitive athletic activity, or just had some athletic activity. I'd been in rah-rah, cheerleader type activities at Wilson High School, and I always felt I was too old to start, swimming. What people did at that time was either swimming or tennis were pretty much the options, I felt. And so rowing, just coming down and in the atmosphere, and then, it was my first year at Cal State Long Beach, and I didn't know very many people. This one, like I said, this one high school boyfriend, and he quit rowing, and that was, so that was over, and I just kept rowing, and it was really Tom McKibben that got me going.
I heard that Tom introduced himself shell to shell. You were actually rowing, and he rowed over to you and
Tom always tells the
"Hi,
story
I'm Tom McKibben."
that we were out rowing in Waries, because I just, and to tell you the truth, I did say that I wished I'd done some competitive thing, but when I came down to row, it was not, and when I got hooked into it, it was not in the intention of being a competitive rower. I just liked the movement, being out on the water, and then the atmosphere with all these men, tall men around. I mean, who could not like that, and especially when there's only a couple of women. So there was just everything going for it. But I just loved being out there, and so I would row around the island in this wherry, and yeah, Tom one time was out there rowing around and pulled up, so hey.
In the locker, or in the weight room, I remember stories of you going in doing leg presses with the football team there, and they would put it up. You would put it on the max weight, if I remember correctly, and crank out 20 or 30 because you were going for endurance. And these big, heavy football guys couldn't do that, and were wondering who is this guy? Anyway, I do remember that from 69 and 70. Let's see. East-West rivalries. Joan, I understand that when you and the other women started rowing, you didn't want to look like, now was it East Coast rowers or was it Eastern European rowers? Or was it both? I
wouldn't put it on any region. I think it was just the idea, or what there was available for women to row in comfortably, and a lot of the women at the time are the competitors, and they were on the East Coast, or I didn't see the Europeans right away, but the East Coast, what we saw were baggy men's T-shirts and baggy trow, and the men's rowing trow, and encouraged by Tom McKibben, who thought you didn't have to look like a man to row as fast as a man. And Karen, my partner at the time, and I both, we were concerned about our looks. We wanted to look good, but we also wanted to row fast, and felt you didn't have to compromise how you looked to row fast. And so we did wear, we strived to keep nice-looking clothes for rowing.
And I heard that you would use a non-waterproof mascara?
Well, I didn't use a non-water. That was the problem. You would get, streaks, but...
And you got a nickname for that?
Oh, well, mudslides. Yeah, you probably saw that. But that was only from Karen, so I don't remember anybody else calling me that. I think the thing that I remember from Tom McKibben was he was concerned about if, the slides, the seat the tracks that the seat slides on at the time would get black from the friction, and they'd leave marks on the backs of your legs. And you'd also get cuts, you could get cuts from the slides in the backs of your calves. And those were things that we were very conscious of, because it's just unattractive. It was unattractive on men as well as women. But to take care to prevent those, or to wipe them off, the backs of your, backs of your upper thighs with these track marks, So those things, and just, yeah, there was a difference between how some women, what they chose to wear and what we chose to wear. And I don't think it hurt us in getting support from, and getting access to facilities and equipment through rowing.
Now, in the literature, there's several books where Boys in the Boat, the amateurs, where there's this tension between East Coast U.S. rowers and West Coast U.S. rowers. Not just the rowers, actually it's more the, I guess, the clubs or the support organizations. Did the two of you ever encounter any problems?
We talked briefly about this earlier, and just thinking about it, it wasn't, I think it wasn't as much a rivalry between the East Coast and the West Coast as the East Coast being dismissive of the West Coast, as far as the club level rowing. I'm not talking about the college, right, Cal and Washington, the big powerhouses, West Coast and rowing, but on the club level, they just, they thought the East Coast was the center of U.S. rowing, and everything should take place there, and there's not enough in the West Coast to worry about, so they can figure out, West Coast people can figure out how they're going to get there, and all the rest, and get their boats back. So it was more of not even considering us, I think, initially.
Okay.
And I think the same with any media that was about rowing at that time. It was dismissive of the West Coast, or didn't give as much attention, or as we deserved,
right,
at the time.
Sure.
Certainly as we became more successful. And Long Beach, in the 60s, when you think of the Olympics for men, because there was no women's Olympics yet until 1976, but the Olympics at that time for men, the sculling spots, there was only a single and a double and a sculling spare. There wasn't a men's quad until 1976. And to think that Long Beach in 1968 had the single sculler, the spare sculler, and the double, half of the double. So most of the sculling team, and they did very well. John's fourth place finish in the 68 Olympics is still, there's one other person that finished fourth since 1956, since John Kelly's bronze medal in the 50s, John Kelly Jr.'s bronze medal in the 56 Olympics. There's no one that's finished higher than that in the single sculls. So my point is that Long Beach really had the best scullers in the nation, at that time, 68 and 72.
Weren't getting the press.
Yeah.
Did either of you get, speaking of press, Emmett Smith, the citizen journalist from the Long Beach Independent Press Telegram?
Yes.
Are there any articles that he's written that the two of you in the archives that you might have that you could share with?
You probably have something.
I
don't know.
He wrote an article. I don't know if it was in the 49er or what. I remember what it was in. Or might even. No, I don't think he got it in the press. But I was rowing one morning. I was working out, going around the island, and there was a lot less boat traffic of all kinds in those days. And you just used to being at 6 o'clock in the morning. You used to being out there by yourselves. And I was rowing, fairly hard along the backside of the island, along the peninsula. And I turn around, there's some guy in a dinghy, some old guy in a dinghy, and I'm almost on top of him. And I realized I couldn't stop the boat fast enough, so I jumped out of the boat to take this momentum out of the boat,
right.
and save my shell. And he wrote some article about that, and he said something about thinking and acting simultaneously or something.
It's quite.
Emmett Smith was a citizen reporter who was, he was in his 70s, in the late 60s, 70s or 80s. He rode a bicycle before it was in vogue to ride a bicycle around Long Beach. And he covered crew. He would write articles for the 49er and the Independent Press Telegram on the crew teams. And So we did get coverage, and it was homegrown, and it was from somebody who was quite unique.
Enthusiastic.
And enthusiastic, and unfortunately, I don't believe he's any longer here with us, so we can't get an interview with him. Let's see here, in 69, you came back from the Olympics. Well, there were two things. One, you had a Volkswagen back then, I believe, and
Right.
the rumor, actually, it's not a rumor, you had lettered on it, "John Van Blom rules the world." Now, was that to intimidate Tom McKibben, or was that?
It was a psychedelic style as well.
It was kind of, yeah,
Stylistic.
the style of the psychedelic posters, you know, the letter, same
the
type
time.
of lettering style of the time, you know.
He still has a
advertising
stencil.
bands.
You still have a stencil, okay.
I've,
Don't you?
no, it wasn't a stencil, but I have
Oh.
a photograph of it. And I don't know what got into me.
Well,
Single scholar.
It was true. It was true. All right, so then you actually, and I was there at the time, rowing junior varsity, you joined the varsity crew, the men's eight at Long Beach State in the spring of '69. How was the transition? You didn't row I don't believe you rowed in the eight in the fall, leading up to that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there might have even been a regatta or two. It started before you got into the varsity boat?
The Olympics were late too.
The Olympics were,
In October.
October.
Okay,
So,
so that would have explained, all right.
yeah.
Why you weren't there in the fall.
And that
Okay.
was, yeah, really my first year that I would possibly row with the college. Before that, I was going to Long Beach City until '67, and then through '67. And so I was enrolled at Long Beach State, but then I was still training for the Olympics. And then, then the Olympics were held late in October, so I just really took a couple classes just to hold my position at the university. I took a rowing class with Bill Lockyer.
One unit,
I got
yes.
an A. So I guess I started in the spring. What was your question?
About
The transition from going from Olympic single sculler
Okay.
to an eight, and we were good, but we weren't.
Yeah.
We weren't. We were competitive in America for
Right,
sure, but
right.
we
I remember
weren't.
I got a Cal shirt out of it.
Right.
So we
Should have
did
gotten to
pretty well.
Stanford and an SC shirt, I believe, also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. Some guys like yourself were were willing to work and eager to work very hard, and some people weren't. Some people it was just something to do while they were in college. So that was a little frustrating for me, I think. But we did do well. But I think after that 1 year, it was something I didn't want to keep doing. I thought I thought it was maybe somewhat getting in the way of my sculling.
And also, in the '64 trials, you had been in the pair, second in the Olympic trials in the pair. So you had sweep sculling, definitely
True.
highly skilled sweep sculler as well. And I guess we generally think if you can single scull, you can sweep without too much problem. But the fact that he'd also been in a small boat, a sweep rowing, at a very high level, he had the skills. So the transition
Yeah, so
there.
I did row sweeps in high school. So
Yeah.
Sweep rowing.
For 27 years, you've run an ergathon for young rowers in the city?
Yeah, well, for all levels, but
It's not the ergathon. The ergathon is another thing.
Ergathon is something, but we
It's
have
a fundraiser.
a competition.
Okay.
We call it the beach sprints, and it's kind of, they first started this in Boston. They had the first indoor rowing championships in Boston, and on rowing machines, and it grew from there. And then now they have the World Championships, which just happened last weekend in
Yeah.
Boston, called the Crash B Sprints, and that was going for about 3 or 4 years, and I just wanted, and it was the same year I was coaching in Long Beach State. I decided I wanted to, see if we could get something going out here, and I contacted them, and they made us a
Concept 2.
Concept
The
2,
manufacturers.
and well, it was also Crash P.
Oh, that's
Tip
right.
Wood was running head of the Crash Ps, And so they designated us a satellite regatta for that, the qualifying race for that. And ever since then, every year we can qualify, if people meet a certain time standard, up to 4 people, that they'll pay their airfare back to race in the Crash Bees. And so, yeah, we've been doing that for 27 years, and they rode 2,000 meters on the Concept 2 rowing machine. And it's all, you know, from high school through, we've had people in their 80s that compete in this.
Well, and so community involvement here. We've got the boathouse, you've got the ergathon, you've got lots of people rowing down there at Long Beach with great facilities close to campus. During the late 60s and early 70s, there was you, Tom McKibben, international competitors. There was you, Tom McKibben from Long Beach, Reed Adler, George Lockwood, there was Joan, there was Karen McCloskey,
Yeah.
there was Melinda
Collis,
Collis,
yes.
There was
Lisa Hansen.
Lisa Hansen.
Yes.
We seem to have had a 6 to 8 to 10 year period of producing internationally competitive rowers, and that we haven't had that since. What was unique about that period, or was it we all got heart rate monitors after that, or in fiberglass shells, or carbon fiber shells, or what?
I think there were a few things at play. I mean, right now, one of the main things is that there's national team selection now, and so
And development camps.
So athletes, top athletes, tend to go to these camps, and clubs aren't producing as much as they used to. They're trying to. The last couple of years, they're trying to encourage clubs to develop athletes more than they have been recently. So there are some clubs, California Rowing Club in the Bay Area and Potomac, and a couple others are, you know, working to produce people to row in the trials and small boats. But the big boats, the 8s and the quads and so forth, that's all camped now. So there's not as much reward for clubs to develop, you know, these athletes, and so as there used to be. But I think it was just a series of coincidences that was going on at Long Beach at the time. I think, you know, myself and Tom and John Nunn came out after he graduated from Cornell in '67, you know, kind of rowing in this area, and it was just, you know, it was just a coincidence that we were here, that, you know, and you know, I just, you know, I had wanted to do well in rowing, and I didn't feel like going to another club. You know, people asked me to row in, you know, Vesper and different clubs in the East Coast, and I didn't want to leave Long Beach, and so, you know, I stayed here and worked hard, and I think other people saw that, you know, you could be successful here. You didn't have to go to Detroit or Philadelphia or, you know, wherever.
You had a good explanation about Tom seeing, you know, he moved
Well, I
back
think-
to Detroit
Yeah.
because he felt he needed to.
I think in the '64 trials,
Olympic trials.
The Olympic trials were in New York in 1964. And Tom, after he got out of college, went back to Detroit.
McKibben,
Okay.
yes.
Tom McKibben, yeah, thank you. Back to Detroit to row with a group of people that were training there, and I rowed with the Crane Buell and the pair. Went back and you know, I was in high school still, but we rowed in the Olympic trials and ended up finished second. And I think that showed Tom that, you know, he didn't have to go back to Detroit to get in a boat to go fast. And so it, you know, it kind of, and then the '67, John Nunn and I rowed in the double in the nationals, and of course, well, before that we rowed also in '67 were the Pan Am trials in New York. And John and I were first and second in the Pan Am trials, and again, I think it kind of motivated Tom McKibben and Reed Adler to, well, maybe we should go race in the nationals in a double. And so they did. They, you know, they went back and rode in the nationals, and John Nunn and I were first, and they were second. So we went.
Long Beach again, first 2 played for.
But You know, and I think that success fed on itself and you know, motivated people.
Motivated others.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so that it could, showed them that it could be done.
In '72, I remember before the Olympic trials, you had several scullers coming out to train, and I'm sure it was
Yeah.
because of the success of John and John Nunn and Tom McKibben and that core, and Reed and George,
George, yeah.
because that was prior to the '72 Olympic.
Mhm.
And so we had several scullers coming out, the best in the nation, to come out to Long Beach to train. And I think it's them. And then as far as women coming was Tom McKibben was the draw. And again, as John has said, this was before national team camp, so there was motivation for a club coach to put in the time and effort, unpaid.
Right.
I never paid for a coach, and this is just what's so unique, now, you know, in retrospect now, in that we were in this club, and this person was willing to give his time to coach us and develop these very fast women. I think they were from Long Beach, maybe 10 women that were on the '76 Olympic team. Tom was the first Olympic sculling coach, and all the scullers on the Olympic team in '76 had trained under Tom.
McKibben.
You know,
there were
so
total, including the
14.
men, there were a total of 14 people on the '76 Olympic team.
from
We had
Long Beach that
managers,
had trained in Long Beach.
coaches, and athletes.
So, you know, I would credit the sculling of Tom and John Nunn and that core of men scullers, and then Tom McKibben was clearly the impetus for the
Yeah,
women
the
that were
women
in
was
Long Beach.
totally due to
Yeah.
Tom's efforts.
You know, and he is his technical abilities, his willingness to put in the time and go the extra effort, his technical abilities not only on sculling but also on rigging, and just the drive and the coaching style. You know,
Right.
he tracked it. He worked at it. He worked at getting people to come out and train with us. Players from Long Beach dominated and in the national championships for women, and I think that was a starting point.
He told the women, true or false, you have to work twice as hard as the men and no crying? Is that?
He probably did. You know, there were women that would probably, ugh, you know, at that. You know, Tom had a lot of funny things. You know, you could take it or, you know, if you know Tom, he's funny. Yeah.
Did you ever dump? You said you jumped out once, stopped from hitting a dinghy.
Yeah.
Emmett Smith reported that as a heroic
Yeah.
heroic event for the national press, or the local press. Did hit any buoys, let go of your oars when you were starting?
The first time I went in a single, I rode in wherries, but the first time I rode in a single, I went out and took a few strokes and tipped over.
Tipped over?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's been occasional times since then.
He just did it a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't seen him do it for decades, literally decades.
Yeah, I
And he
did.
did it when there were a bunch of new people that were starting out on the dock rowing. And I heard this splash. I was getting my oars, and I heard this splash, and I thought that was a new person that had fallen. And I turned around, it was John.
Didn't like my oarlock.
Didn't lock
I
your
got
oar.
distracted with talking to people, didn't like my oarlock.
And they pop out.
The new people were very happy to see that. Oh, yeah.
And you?
I remember that. I don't remember flipping. I was pretty cautious, and I don't remember flipping when I was learning too much. But I do remember around the other side of the island, doing hard strokes and just catching a crab and going in. You know, and then I remember getting back in and finishing. You know, Tom was with us, and you finished the workout. You know, so
Soggy
you're
or
pretty
not.
warmed up anyway. But and then another time flipping in a double with that same high school boyfriend that I remember. I said, never again. I'm not going.
That's literally dumping your boyfriend.
Yeah, right. It's his fault, I'm sure. So.
Okay. Any other stories or any other memories that you want to document?
Well, I was just thinking about the people nowadays don't realize that where we started rowing originally with the old boathouse, down in the corner of Nieto in Colorado. And that's when I first started rowing, that's where we rowed out of. And the stadium went a little farther. They filled that in because they were going to build a crosstown freeway, and it was going to go over that, so they need to fill that section in. Unfortunately, that never got built. But rowing out of the old boathouse, we'd row out of there in the afternoon, and there was water skiing going on. We'd have to row through the water skier. And there was a lot more water skiing activity then than there is now.
Yeah.
And so it was always a challenge. Especially where the turning buoys are, because those wakes would kind of come together and bounce off of each other.
Well, any particular overseas or internet or national race where it was really rough and that came
Well, it did. Well, I think just rowing around the island in the afternoon, with the wind picking up and dealing with that rough water helped out in a number of occasions. And a lot of people would they'd just row in the smooth water, because it's easier to get the work in. You're not fighting the waves, but they'd get in rough conditions in a regatta and they'd have trouble. So it paid off definitely.
Yeah, that is the beauty of rowing in Long Beach. You could have different conditions almost daily around the year. I mean, it often got windy. It often gets windy, and so you go around that backside to practice in the wind.
In the morning, it's always smooth, but
Yeah.
in the afternoon, you get more challenging conditions, which is good for you.
So you were at Rothenburg, Germany?
Ratzeburg.
Ratzenburg, yeah, Ratzenburg, Germany. It was you were training there with.
Ratzeburg, Germany was northern Germany. It's a training camp for the West Germans at the time, and we did train there, and it usually very nice water, and there was a couple of lakes, and there was an area where you had to go from one big lake to a smaller lake where you would pass through these narrow tunnels. You kind of had to pull your oars in a single, and there were swans, and I do remember one time with Karen McCloskey, there was the two of us sculling, both in singles, and in this small area, somehow she flipped, and the swans just came after her, and she had to hit her oar, to keep them away, to hustle to get back in the boat, to keep the swans from getting her.
Protecting the
Very
babies.
aggressive swans. I'm sure that's probably where the
Territorial.
nesting area was there. So I always think of that as being a funny time.
I heard you were there at the same time the men's lightweight 8 was training.
Yes.
For the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And there
Well,
was,
we went to Rotsburg several times. So,
okay.
but
But there was one time where it was gale force winds, and you and Karen decided to go out and because of your experience at Long Beach and training
Yeah.
in the wind, and they wouldn't go out. They were in the 8.
Tom was pretty. As John said, you're gonna race. They don't call off unless it's really ridiculous. They're not calling off the race and internationally. So it was benefited us to practice in that, and we did. Now that we're thinking about that, I remember a race in Lucerne that John was in the double. It was just a ridiculous wind and
thunderstorm was
rain
coming by.
coming down, and they didn't call off the race. So yes.
Right. So, John, we just heard Joan explain the inner motivation for why she rows to this day. You've been rowing since you were 6 and a dinghy, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things. I mean, first, it's about the best exercise you can do, and it just, and it feels good. It's just enjoyable and pleasurable to be out there in the water and enjoy being in a reasonable condition, and it clears my head and makes me feel better, and so that's those are the reasons I keep doing it. In the last 10 years or so, maybe a little longer, 15 years, I started getting back into doing masters races, and that's been fun. You're rowing with a group of guys and having friends that you can share this experience with, and fortunately we've been successful and won a lot of races, and it's been good. Travel around and see old friends from the past. So a lot of reasons I keep doing it.
I think we also select races. I mean, choose to be in masters races because it kind of keeps you training. Some days when you don't want to. Well, I got this race coming up, so and then you're always glad you train, but sometimes it's tough to get out of the water, get yourself down to the
Some
boathouse.
afternoons and I don't really feel like working out, but got this race coming up, so I better work out. So it polices you into doing the work.
Excellent. Okay. Any questions from the audience?
That was very interesting and fun.
Well, one question for the audience, though, is you talk separately and everything, but you guys got together at some point, so was it both your mutual love for the sport that drew you together, or was there something else?
It took a while to get John together. I started rowing the fall of 1970, and we started going out in the fall of 1974. So I kept working on it, but I think, he had other girlfriends. We were both training, and so maybe John can answer that better.
I don't know if I want to.
But, yeah, and he was already, when I came down there, he was already kind of, oh, it's John Van Blom, and I remember him, he'd be out doing, out training by himself in the back channel, and coming in from the single, I'm thinking, how can he do that, and there was just so much admiration for him. Plus, like I said, he'd already been in the Olympics, he was kind of a big deal, but that wasn't my, well, maybe it was the beginning, but how we got together. I think he was very supportive. He was close friends with Tom, who was my coach the whole time. And so he did go on, in 1973, went back to our national championships, which is also kind of the trials to go to the world championships. And he helped drive the boats back, and he was getting more involved with Tom's group that he was coaching. So we'd been friends through that, but I don't know.
Gradually became Tom's assistant coach with the sculling team. Girls.
So how we got together, I was just around each other a lot,
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't immediate.
How did you combine or juggle careers in family and rowing? How did
For myself, I lived at home. I started rowing in 1970, freshman year, and my family, I grew up in Long Beach, so we lived just a couple miles from the boathouse, and I lived at home through my college years and through the 76 Olympics. Then just kind of the college and student teaching, because I became a physical education teacher, that all kind of wrapped up right around the 76 Olympics. I student taught in the fall of that year, before the Olympics. And so after the 76 Olympics, I did get a teaching job, and that's when I moved out, when I felt I had money to move out. Did I think I would still keep training after that? No, I thought, I remember thinking that was going to be the end of it. And then each year, things came up, you go, oh, I'm still going to train, or you look at where the international competition is going to be, and those memories of how, I'd say magical memories of competing internationally. The trips and the competition at the World Championships, it's just, it's something that would have been hard to imagine until I'd done it. People from all over the world, mainly Europe, Australia, New Zealand, just, getting together in a sport they love and they're excel at, and having that opportunity, plus to go to these places that I wouldn't have considered going to maybe at the beginning, and then finding out these wonderful locations. So I think that kept me going as well as just wanting to. But how I juggled it, like I said, when I first graduated, I didn't, and got a teaching job, I didn't think I would, but then those memories keep coming back and you get hooked again. And it was a tough juggle, teaching full-time, and usually with physical education, in fact, always with physical education, I had to coach as well, not rowing, because it wasn't rowing coaching. I was coaching volleyball, I coached track, I coached softball. I mean, in middle school, you coached everything. And I'd still go, lunchtime, go run the hill and, row before teaching, run the hill, or, do some type of activity at lunchtime, and then go row after the coaching. So it was, and I was living, at that time then I was done living at home. This was after 76. So all of the rowing from 76 on until 84, till my last Olympics, I was teaching full time and usually coaching, and even at high school. So it was a big challenge, and I think, now people are just, you know, that would be one thing I wouldn't mind, that pampering and having some financial support and to live out. But I chose, I wanted that career because I could see that rowing wasn't going to support me all my life. And now I'm glad I was able to do it, but maybe I would have been able to compete a little better with able to give full time to rowing. But I do value that what Cal State Long Beach prepared me for, to physical education teaching. I had a strong career in it, a good satisfying career in it, and was able to row, you know, from that 76 till 84 Olympics.
For me, I most of the time worked for myself, self-employed, doing woodworking, so, you know, I was able to take off time. I just didn't get paid during that time I took off. So I, you know, had to, you know, budget myself carefully, live frugally, you know, for a couple of years while I was in college. I lived out of my van down at the boathouse, parked in the boathouse, and, but, yeah, it was just being self-employed. I could take off during the summer and, you know, start at the beginning.
If I remember correctly, that brings back memories. You lived out of your van at the boathouse, which
Yeah.
is fairly common. A lot of people would spend weeks down there or weekends or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and row. And you had a hot plate? Did you have a hot
I had a
plate?
little stove, a little butane stove in there, 2 burners.
Right, and did you remember the old Coke machine?
Yeah.
That with the lid that lifted
Right,
up,
right.
you could store your refrigerator stuff
Right,
on top
right.
on top of the Coke
Right.
machine. The lid would lift up, and you would
Yeah.
put a dime in or whatever
Right.
order, and you would slide the Coke out.
And I also had a key to the side to open it up and put stuff in.
It's in
for
the
people
side.
that- Yeah,
So, those were the days.
yeah. Can't do that anymore.
No.
Now I'd be considered homeless.
Yes, yes. So, all right, anything else? That was great, Donna, thank you. Anything else you can think of you want to?
I was just thinking about Bill Lockyer, that, you know, what a important part he played in it all, you know.
Yes.
And, you know, when I first started, there was probably 3 or 4, 5 people maybe that, in the club, that rowed regularly, you know, that actually went out in singles, and he was one of them. And you know, and you know, after the college would row, you know, he'd be carrying a single down and go out and row on. And he, you know, he helped me in high school. He, you know, I mean, I had my coach was Paul Manning, you know, that coached the high school program, but he was always willing to let other people, you know, add their expertise. And, you know, first year before I went back to the nationals to row in the single high school nationals, Bill went out in the double with me, and, you know, just, you know, he was just always around and just, you know, putting in his time and with the college. And, you know, he'd go up and pick up towels from the university and bring them down to the boathouse, a big bag of towels, take up the dirty ones, you know, doing that sort of stuff that he wasn't getting paid for.
Right.
And, you know, he had a couple of markets around town, small markets that, you know, he'd employed college rowers at, and you know, just what a great guy he was. And, you know, he was, you know, one of the reasons that rowing continued, you know, in Long Beach.
Sure.
If it was just a club, you know, it was so small at the time that the city might have just, well, it's not even worth, you know, giving them the space to row out of. So, you know, just what an asset he was.
Oh, he was, no, number of hours he spent
Yeah.
over those years.
Yeah.
When I started, he'd sold to family markets, I believe, and he had a full-time job at,
Yeah, he was a
in a
butcher
market,
in a market.
butcher
yeah.
in a market,
Yeah, he was
yeah.
a good butcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, John and Joan, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. I attended a conference once that said your legacy is what you leave behind that benefits the community, and both of you have clearly done that. We're all in awe, and we're all in great appreciation.
Well, thank you. It's been our pleasure. We love to share rowing, you know, it's our passion, and so we feel very supported, and we appreciate this.
Long Beach and rowing is better off with both of us.
Thank you.